Hello, and welcome to Portfolio Matters. In today's podcast, which is the second of our series on angel investing, we welcome my old friend, Michael Byrne, who is a very experienced angel and has done a lot more angel deals than I have. And he is going to share a disaster with us. And I always love these.
Hello, Keith.
Now, one of the problems with angel investing is that people generally say it takes between 3 and 5 years from your initial investment to successful or unsuccessful exit. But the reality is, I think it takes quite a lot longer. I think the reality is it's generally 7 to 10 years. And as you wait for your few successful exits, which take 7 to 10 years, you get all the companies which are going to fail will fail. So, the early years of angel investing, you just see essentially the failures while the good ones chug on and hopefully grow. And in our dreams, we dream of a hockey stick where sales go through the roof. But the reality is the initial years are spent sorting the winners out from the losers. And Michael has a story to tell. Now, as we are not going to be recommending any shares, I will skip the disclaimer. Their full disclaimer can be found at the end. As always, do your own research. We have disguised all the names in this podcast to disguise the guilty. Any relationship to people living or dead is entirely coincidental. So don't sue us. And on that note...
Hi, Keith, you're absolutely right. Angel investing, not for the faint-hearted. Latest research is showing that on average, it's about 8 years for an exit. So this is a tale of woe. We'll call them Zip & Co. And they made batteries. Well, they weren't really batteries, but we'll come into that in a moment. I don't know if you've seen today, Crunchbase just came out saying that VCs put in $3.5 billion to battery companies last year. This is on the back of lithium prices going through the roof and, potential shortages. So anybody that's got a good battery story, you'd be more than welcome to come to the VC trough.
And I'd also say that, one of the things about angel investing is the company, the technology you invest in doesn't have to be a success. You essentially, as long as you can sell it on to a VC or somebody, or an IPO.
So what have I learned from this escapade? I think I probably went in thinking, this is brilliant technology, there's a great market for it. And I didn't have enough emphasis on people, because really what you're buying in a startup is people. And so, I was looking at the market, the product, not really the people. The entrepreneur team, I didn't really look at that in enough depth. But also, this was a hardware play. Funding hardware soaks up a vast amount of capital. You're constantly raising capital. You're constantly trying to draw in new money to build that hardware. And then once you've built it, then you've got to build the factory to build it. So hopefully, as you say, we'll, by that point in time, hopefully you've offloaded the company to a VC who can raise a lot more money. And also, the other thing that I learned was, not everything that you're going to be told by the company is wholly true, and they're not going to tell you everything that they know. That's part of the game. This was pitched as a super fast charging battery. Well, it wasn't actually a battery. It was a thing called a supercapacitor. And supercapacitors are great because they store a vast amount of energy very quickly. So, they actually demonstrated charging a drill, and it took 2 minutes to charge this drill, and we saw it. So it was very cool from an investor point of view that we can see the product. It's very rare as a startup you get to actually see the product. So, you know, this is a company that had been going along for a little while. They had a product. They were a very credible team of scientists, all spun out from Oxford University. The management team was very experienced. They had a highly credible board. The other thing that we were sold on is, I don't know if you've ever seen someone drill through a lithium battery, but it
Yes.
doesn't go well. It's not a happy end to that story. Whereas with one of these graphite-based batteries, you can drill through them, nothing happens. You can take them on a plane, nothing happens. And of course, you're using graphite and you're not using lithium. So it's very, very easy to come by, very cheap materials. So what you've got here is a story of great technology. You've got a story of, you know, a credible technology team. You've got a story of a product that could really, truly revolutionize the world. Angel investors are always looking for a 10x exit. If we got to exit, and if this worked, you'd have blown that 10x out of the park. This would truly have altered the path of the next 10 years. The original person that we all met used to be an investment manager at a very credible London-based angel syndicate. They've raised literally hundreds of millions of pounds for startups. He was one of their key players, but he thought that Zip was so good that he left the syndicate and joined Zip full-time. His black book of contacts was legendary, and you know, he'd done this dozens of times before. Very, very credible, presents brilliantly, knows the subject, knows how to raise money, and you just look at him and you go, yeah, I want to give you money. So, you know, we're getting to a situation where you've got the right person presenting to you. You've got very credible scientists behind it. You've got a product that will truly revolutionize the world. So on the next slide, let's see, why did I investigate? Why did I invest? So there you go. Everything I've been talking about, they had good intellectual property. They'd already had lots of investment and lots of grants. So Innovate UK had been putting in, you know, hundreds of thousands of pounds into this, which is, for an investor, free money.
Yeah.
You know, that's just free money that the company has got. They haven't had to raise it. They haven't had to give away any equity. But at the point I invested, I hadn't met the CEO. I hadn't met the chairman. And it turns out that the CEO and the chairman were one and the same person. That's never good corporate governance. So let's talk a little bit on the next slide about the king. So the king, he was very much king of all he surveyed. So, you know, he was CEO, he was chairman, he was co-founder. He was everybody. He was in the middle of everything, but you rarely got to meet him. He had form, you know. This was not his first walk in the park. Now, normally, investors like someone who is a little bit blooded and a little bit battle scarred, because they'll have learnt from their mistakes. And so that's how we were sold him. We didn't get to meet him, but we were sold him. You know, this guy is so busy. He's done lots of these startups before. And I guess I just bought that. That was my mistake. That was the biggie. He'd been on Dragon's Den, and he'd asked for literally millions for a very small stake in the company that he was pitching in at the time. And you know, the dragons there, we give them a hard time in the angel world because it's a TV show, it's not reality. But actually they saw right through him, you know, ridiculous, losing sight of reality. They got it absolutely right. This was not the same company, this was a previous company. And you know, you look at his track record, littered with failures, but also more worrying that we should have noticed was, if you didn't agree with him, you didn't last long. The average tenure on his board wasn't very long.
So Michael, can I just ask, how would you know going forwards how to get that information about how fast the turnover is?
So actually, yeah, nowadays, so this was a few years ago, nowadays, I would go to Companies House and look on the Companies House register for all of the directors for any company that I'm going to invest in. And I would then look at all the other things that they've done. Now, if they've done one or two other things that have gone pear-shaped, fair enough. If they've all had pear-shaped investments and enterprises before, yeah, I would start to worry. But I'd also ask around. There are quite a lot of people that will venture their knowledge of people quite easily within the angel world. I find the angel world is quite a good one because you're not really competing with each other. So people are more likely to try and help you. They're more likely to try and give you the wisdom of their knowledge. They'll rarely do it on email, but they'll quite often do it on the phone. Right. So I'll just pick up the phone and speak to people and go, have you heard about so-and-so? But I'll spend a lot longer on Google, frankly, just Googling everybody involved in this company. But I'll also look at the cap table. The cap table, for those who haven't come across that before, is basically the shareholder register. And I'll look on the shareholder register and see if there's anybody on there that I know. I'll put the people on the cap register through LinkedIn to see if anybody I know knows someone that's already invested. And I'll try and get an invite to an existing investor of my choosing. Quite often companies will say, well, do you want to talk to, you know, Peter Thiel, who's invested in X company before, he wasn't involved in this one? And you'll go, yeah, I'd love to talk to him. And he'll just tell you what you want to hear. You know, he won't tell you the absolute truth. But if it's someone you found before that you know, then you're much more likely to get the warts and all view of what's actually going on. I'd also asked to see the previous shareholder updates, because I find that if you've got a CEO that's doing shareholder updates, that means he values the shareholders, or she values the shareholders. And you're getting a sense of, you know, respect from them. Looking back here, the shareholder updates, the pimp did a few of them, but you never got one from the king, because the king really didn't care about the shareholders. So actually, things went pretty well. The pimp was doing his job really, really well. He raised tens of millions of pounds in grants and equities. The technology was going pretty well. In supercapacitors, the amount of energy that they can store is proportional to the square of the voltage that you can cram into the battery. Most supercapacitors are generally 3 at push volts. They've now managed to stabilize this at 3.5 volts, which is reasonably good. To make it properly worthwhile, it has to be 4 volts. And there was a roadmap to get there. There was a factory in China that was starting to produce these cells. They were in a joint venture with 2 massive multi-billion-dollar companies in the US to explore a charging station. Let me just talk about that for a second, because this is going to be a problem with all of the EVs that we've got on the roads at the moment, in that most charging stations, or most petrol stations, will have a normal 100 amp supply, which means that if you use the existing petrol stations, you can only really fast charge 1 or 2 cars. So the idea was to dig up these petrol stations, put in these massive supercapacitors underneath the petrol stations, so that they would store a lot of energy that they can give up very, very quickly. And you would charge them at 100 amps, but they could deliver far faster than that. So you charge them overnight, and then during the day, they could charge your Teslas really, really quickly. So there was a huge amount of money going into that, and it's still going into that. And this would have been a really good part of that infrastructure. They'd also managed to recruit a huge American merchant bank to launch a Series B funding round for a serious amount of money that would have got them a long way down the road. And there was a big EV startup that's recently floated that invested $1.5 million and was prepared to invest a lot more. And then on New Year's Eve 2019, we got this brilliant announcement that Zip would exit to the US EV company. So, 3 years after investment, we'd all get out, highly liquid. And then there was kind of a PS on that email that we all got saying, some of the board have left. Just by the way, we're a few board directors lighter than we were. But everyone's thinking, it's fine. Who cares about the board? Because we're out. We're good to go. We're going to get a load of money back. This big EV that's got boatloads of cash that's just bought us out. Happy days. And, everyone's going away, bottle of champagne. Well, yeah, didn't quite go as well as we had hoped. So, as I was saying, the voltage on the batteries needed to be, or the supercapacitors needed to be up to 4 volts. And that's why the EV company had put money in, because they believed that some of the experimental batteries had got up to 4 volts. Well, Zip wasn't able to demonstrate that. Needless to say, the EV company weren't too happy about that and pulled out, threatening all kinds of lawsuits. The big credible merchant bank turned around and said, yeah, actually, we didn't manage to find any money either. So you've lost your exit. We can't find you any other money. So you're probably on the verge of insolvency. More of the board started to jump ship. Actually, we still to this day don't know whether they jumped or they were pushed. And at this point, there was a major restructuring plan announced, because the company had taken on millions of pounds of debt, unbeknown to the shareholders. And the idea was that to convert all of that debt into shares, and convert that debt into shares at a very, very small share price. Because the company, by that point in time, their exit had gone away. Not a lot of new money could be found. So the value on the company when the debt was restructured was very low. So essentially the debt holders then would have owned all of the company, and all the shareholders would have gone bye-byes. But we would have still been shareholders. So we would have had a shareholding that's worth almost nothing, but not precisely nothing. And that will become important in our story shortly. So there was this big come to Jesus shareholder EGM announced for the 28th of June. But then the bondholders, who were about to take over the whole company, essentially, came up with an alternative proposal, because the bondholders would have been shareholders in a company that still had bad management in their view. So they were going to structure it in a different way. Needless to say, the king didn't want this to happen, because the bondholders' alternative proposal would have removed the king. And we'd have gone from a republic, if you like, to a democracy. And the bondholders were very credible. They started winning over the support of the shareholders. The shareholders were all up for it. And the shareholders were like, right, we go with the bondholders. We'll get rid of the king. We'll get rid of the existing management team who have taken us down this path to ruination almost. And it's looking good. But then on the 24th of June, 4 days before the EGM, the king goes, nah, not having any of it. The company is insolvent. We're in administration. And he appointed administrators and said, we're insolvent. So what did I learn? Well, people, you can't spend too much time looking at the people of a company. Really, what you're buying into is people. It's the people that are going to get this over the line. It's the people that are going to get this job done. You can have the best technology in the world, but without the right people, it's going nowhere. Investors. At the end of the day, we couldn't attract investors. Now, why that was, I'm sure you can draw your own conclusions. But at that point in time, if you're putting in millions of dollars, you're going to be dealing with the king. Was that a reason why people didn't want to invest? Draw your own conclusions. Market, is there a market for the product? There absolutely was. Product, you know, this was a great product, but actually it never reached its full potential. So again, the entrepreneur management team is key. You know, if we look at some of the big startups over our lifetime, we've got people like Microsoft founder Bill Gates. We've got Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook. We've got Elon Musk and Tesla. The two are synonymous. Whenever you've got a good company, you've got a good founder, normally. And you always know the founder. It takes someone special to found these and run these really big companies. So you're expecting someone who's slightly megalomaniac, I can't say that one, someone who's slightly a megalomaniac, but not someone who doesn't listen at all. And at the end of the day, if you're investing in someone, you have to ask yourself the question, could you work with them? Because if you can't work with them, chances are nobody else can. So funding hardware, difficult and expensive. You know, we raised tens of millions of dollars for Zip. It wasn't enough. Hardware plays take a lot of money, and that's one of the reasons why a lot of angel investment goes into software as a service, things like that, because you don't need a lot of money to build that business. And also, I learned that not everything the company was telling us was the whole truth. There were a few things they were not telling us, and indeed not telling the EV company that invested as well. And those chickens always come home to roost. So there's one other thing I'd like to add at this point in time, that there was a quirk here, that at the point that it went in, so at the point when the company was being sold to the EV company, it was very, very odd that for most of the shareholders, the company was worth more dead than it was alive, as it turns out. We weren't told this originally, but the king had been selling a lot of shares at not very much money. So most of the small shareholders had seen their share of the company drop dramatically. So the company was worth more, but our shares were worth less. And at that point in time, had the EV company taken over, I would have got about 10% of my money back. But because of EIS, if the company died, I would have got 20-odd% of my money back, because I would have been able to write that off against my tax liability. So exits are great, but they have to be the right exit. This was not the right exit. And actually, when everything came out about these new shares that we'd never been told about or been allowed to invest in, it came out that, yeah, death was the better option than life for the small shareholders.
Wow. So just on that last point, Michael, so when you're saying that, in December 2019, when it's announced there's going to be this takeover by this big American EV company, if that had gone ahead, you wouldn't have actually got your money back. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. We would have got about 1/10 of our money back.
My God.
And we would have lost all of the EIS benefits and all of the tax benefits of being a shareholder in a small company, because this would have happened within the 3 years of some of our investments. Not all of us, but some of our investments would have been the 3 years. So we would have had to pay back all of the EIS benefits that we'd already had.
Christ. Well, Michael, thank you. That's a great story. And there are loads of takeaways from this, actually. Well, I remember us talking about this years ago, actually, and you were very keen on it. And it did look like it was doing really well until it weren't. So to me, I mean, you talked about this yourself, but the big error you made was not meeting the CEO. And yet, the more deals I do, the more I think it's actually, it all comes down to, do you like the CEO? Can you work with him? Is he going to fuck you, actually? Because that's the other thing. There's enormous power and information asymmetry. Essentially, you own what? 1%, 0.5% of this business, and loads of other angels own little chunks. The idea that you can hold the chief executive who owns 45 or 60% of this company to account is just laughable. And he can do so many things to basically take away your economic rights, as shown in this example. So you have to trust that he's going to look after your interests and is fundamentally honest. And to me these days, that is the number one priority. But I liked your idea of looking at the cap table, looking for other investors and going and talking to them. I think that's a really good idea. And actually, if you, the more connected you are in the angel network, the better you are able to do that.
Yeah, for sure. And just coming back to your information asymmetry point, unusually, I actually went along to one of the AGMs, and disappointingly, there were only 2 shareholders at the AGM. And even amongst just 2 of us, every question we asked, we were told, I'm sorry, that's company confidential. We can't tell you the answer to that. Every single question we asked, we were told, no, we can't tell you the answer to that. Yeah, it's just disappointing.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, so as you know, Richard, who would be on this call, is not on this call because he is the CFO of one of our investee companies, of which I am the investor director and quite a large shareholder. And I thought, having been to board meetings, etc., that I knew this company quite well. Richard goes in the CFO. There are a lot of problems there that we didn't know about. And actually, even in a company you think you know quite well, These companies always put on their best face, and you're never going to know all the problems unless you're actually on the executive team.
Yeah.
So that's just something you've got to accept as an investor, as an angel investor. And, everything looked good in this, but I mean, the fundamental problem was that it seems to me that the management team were not trustworthy.
Yeah, parts of the management team. Parts of the management team were absolutely spot on. Parts were slightly less spot on.
Right.
So shall we see what happened in the end on the next slide then?
Right. Sorry. Yes.
Because there is an epilogue to this.
Ah.
So technology promised to the EV company never did exist. We think I've covered that. The factory in China that we've been told is making all of these batteries, equally, not so much. The bondholders did try and buy the company out of administration, and raised money from the existing shareholders to do this, believe it or not, because they had played a straight bat with us and we knew they were trustworthy. Unfortunately, the liquidator never agreed to their proposals. We don't know why. There's murk there, and I'm not going to go into it. But the king is back. Long live the king. The king put together a new company, bought Zip out of administration for a fraction of the value he was going to sell it to the EV company. He set up a special purpose acquisition company to buy out Zip 2.0. They raised quite a lot of money, shares changing hand at eye-watering valuations. Finally, the US regulator stepped into this SPAC and suspended the dealings in shares in the SPAC. The share price dropped 90%, and nothing has happened a year later to that SPAC. It hasn't made the acquisition. It's gone dormant. Strangely enough, their management hasn't communicated at all. And it looks like the SPAC is dead.
Mm-hmm.
And the king went on to write a book.
Wow. Well, what a good story. I mean, the thing is, people who can spin a good tale, if as long as the new investors fail to follow up on his past, he can keep on spinning the tale. Yeah. So
long as they make the same mistake as I made, it'll be fine. And that's one of the purposes of, today. People have to stop making my mistake.
Well, the thing is, when you talk about the angel investment space, I mean, that what I really like about angel investing is that, there is this feeling of there being a community and you're all in it together. And frankly, you like to see other angels succeeding because this is quite difficult. We all have our fair share of disasters. I finally got my first update from a company I invested in a year ago. And when we talk about the CEOs, etc., I liked her. She was really nice. We saw all the previous shareholder updates. We invested, no more updates. A year later, we get the first update. Q4 sales down 59% on the year.
Ouch.
Yeah, ouch. Doesn't answer emails. She was really nice prior to investing. And that's the thing. Your relationship with the CEO is best the day before you hand over the cash, because they need you then. After you've handed over the cash, you're just an annoying encumbrance, essentially. So on that note,
on that bombshell,
thank you to Michael for sharing his experience. I hope you'll come on to share a few more when you have more tales to tell. This is a cool.
I have more than one company that's gone pear-shaped.
Right. Well, I actually have another couple lined up. I need to do talks on. The trouble is, as we talked about at the start, in the early days, you only have tales of woe, companies going bust. But I think the important thing is to learn the lessons of them. So thank you very much for sharing this, Michael.
My pleasure.
And if anyone else out there has any angel investing tales they'd like to tell, please get in touch and we would love to hear it. In the meantime, please can you press like and subscribe to the channel. And thank you very much to Michael. And it's goodbye from Michael Byrne.
And goodbye from Keith Johnson.
Goodbye.
Full disclaimer. The material and information contained in this podcast is for information and entertainment purposes only and should not be relied upon for making a business, legal or any other decision. We may own or have a financial interest in any securities mentioned. Listeners should conduct their own research or consult a professional investment advisor before making any decisions regarding topics mentioned on the show. Whilst we endeavour to ensure that the information presented on the show is correct, we make no representations or warranties of any kind, express or implied, with respect to the podcast and website or to any information, products, services or related graphics discussed or presented in the podcast or website. Any reliance you place on such material is strictly at your own risk. You are solely responsible for the investment decisions you make. We will not be responsible for any errors or omissions in the podcast or website, including in articles or postings, for hyperlinks embedded in messages, or for any results obtained from the use of such information. Nor will we be liable for any loss or damage, including consequential damages, if any, caused by a reader's reliance on any information provided by the podcast or website. Please do not listen to the podcast if you do not accept self-responsibility for your actions.